The topic of college student homelessness is really important to me, and it started with what I went through as a student and realizing that others were going through it too. My name is Alex Katz, and I am the owner and founder of Alex Katz Coaching, LLC. I would say that being homeless obviously means something different to everyone, and within my own journey, it's meant something different to me at different points in time. I think that when I was struggling with housing insecurity and had the option to identify as homeless on the application for financial aid, I never actually identified as homeless because to me, I was just couch surfing. I would define it more as anytime that you don't have a stable place to call home, if you are not sure where you're going to be sleeping at night, if you don't have an address, a physical address to put down when you are trying to register to vote or get mail, if you are not sure where you're going to be living in the next couple of days, weeks, months, then that very well could mean that you struggle with housing insecurity or homelessness. I think that there are many different perceptions surrounding people who experience homelessness or housing insecurity. I think that at least the circles that I'm a part of are very open to talking about these issues, and that might be because I've been driving conversations around these issues, but I also can remember back to being in the middle of it and feeling so much shame and stigma around my situation. I still see a lot of shame and stigma, and even just in conversations with folks at the university level where I talk about the work that I do, there's a lot of disbelief almost that students might be experiencing housing insecurity, right? We often think of homelessness as people living on the streets, adults living on the streets. And then we talk about college students experiencing homelessness, and I've literally heard people say that that's not a thing. People who work at universities even say that that is not a thing. Students don't have to experience that. Students have families, right? These are all things that I've heard. And I also think that we have normalized couch surfing. I think that's another problem, is we've normalized that. It's like, oh, that's just what you do. You couch surf and you eat ramen and you eat mac and cheese. And I think that's been normalized by people who haven't actually experienced it. Coming in as a first-year student in college, I didn't realize that the residence halls were going to shut down for weeks or months at a time, right? I thought, here I am, I made it to college, this is gonna give me a place to live, I'm going to live in the residence halls, I'll have food, everything will be great. It was, until I didn't realize that the residence hall would shut down for a week in November for Thanksgiving break, and then I didn't realize it was going to shut down again in December for winter break, which would be several weeks this time, and then again for a week in April for spring break, and then again for a few months over the summer. And as a result, I got really creative about where I was staying. I learned how to stay in places like the library or my car that wasn't running, and use places like the gym to shower and just get really resourceful. But looking back on it, I could have started defining myself as housing insecure much sooner, and not just much sooner in terms of living in the residence halls, but much sooner in terms of pre-college. My earliest memory of this was actually in elementary school. I don't know what triggered it. I was probably in third grade at the time, maybe younger, honestly. And I just remember my parents saying I couldn't come back home. I used to keep a trash bag hanging out my window with the things that I considered to be my prized possessions at the time. It really wasn't until later in my 20s where I had this realization that, wow, that's housing insecurity. I didn't know if I'd be able to come back there to sleep at night. I started keeping a lot of my things that I needed in my high school locker. I started showering in my high school locker. I started sleeping in my high school locker room. And that's the benefits of being a varsity athlete, I guess. We had our own space, but I started doing all of that because I never knew if I'd be allowed to come back home. I never knew if I'd be allowed to stay at home. After college, I decided to pursue a master's program in order to help other college students experiencing housing insecurity and family estrangement. And so I spent from 2018 to 2021 working at the University of Connecticut, and I was coordinating a college access program for high schoolers in the foster care system to help them graduate high school and matriculate to college. And while I was there, I also created a group. It kind of became a student organization, but I was doing some unofficial advising as well, called Creating Caring Communities. And within that group, we were really trying to form exactly what it sounds like. Creating a caring community is what we were trying to do for students in that situation. I developed an unofficial caseload of almost 200 students, right? This wasn't my job, but students were just coming to me saying, hi, I'm struggling with this. I need help and I don't know who to turn to, or I haven't gotten great reactions other places. I've even had staff members bring students to me to assist them. And so it's important to me because I know it's happening and I know that student needs are not being met. So the resources that exist for students experiencing housing insecurity really depend on the state that you live in, the institution that you're going to, and the resources that are both at the college and at the state level. So there are several programs on the state level within Connecticut, for example, that really focus on students who are under the age of 18. But 18 and over, I know that they are trying to do a youth count every year with the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness to kind of get a sense of how many students are experiencing housing insecurity on college campuses. There are other programs that are trying to be formed, right? So if you are in foster care, for example, there are some programs for students in foster care because the state is their legal guardian and needs to help them with housing. But a lot of independent students are not in foster care. They might have had interactions with the system, like they may have had a DCF referral at one point when they were younger. They might have been in the system temporarily, but they are not currently in the system. And so for those students, there are limited programs. There are a few where you could have a case manager and you would stay in a home basically where you could, you're there for a couple of weeks, but a lot of students don't want to use that because there are a lot of transportation issues. Students are worried about safety issues and there's a lot of stigma around it. But at this point in time, I can't exactly tell you what programs exist for a student who's experiencing housing insecurity who's not in the Department of Children and Family system. One of the things that I would love to see is for universities to have an actual program, kind of like what I was trying to create, where there is a central office and a central advisor who is well-versed in not only the resources that exist, but what students who are experiencing housing insecurity are actually going through, because I think often there is a disconnect. I think that we can say, wow, you don't have a place to live, that sucks, here are the resources, but it takes a special form of connection for a student who is in survival mode, for a student who is potentially escaping abuse, for a student who potentially is dealing with PTSD, who may have grown up not trusting adults, who may have had to do everything themselves and doesn't know how to self-advocate or sees asking for help as a sign of weakness. It takes a really special connection that needs to be formed with that student for the resources to then become accessible. Some sort of center, I think, to help students, just like we do with the Puerto Rican and Latin American Cultural Center, right? Or the Rainbow Center, to have students have a safe space where they do feel like they belong, where they can have their own types of events, where they can create their own resources, where they can access resources, and they can be exposed to caring adults that they trust, which then will teach them that there are more caring adults that they can trust and teach them that they can self-advocate and they can ask for help. I think we can just start to, one, look at what are the events and what's the greater campus culture that's occurring. Two, how do we connect students with other students in similar situations? And three, how do we make them feel heard and actually feel like we legitimately care about them and they're not just a part of our job?